Whether you're home or away, stay connected to your team with T-Mobile, the network that covers 99% of people in America. They've been investing billions to light up their best network ever. From your backyard to a sold-out stadium, get T-Mobile's best coverage yet. Plus, with T-Mobile, you get a price lock guarantee, so they won't raise the rate of your talk, text, and data, ever. There's never been a better time to switch. Visit your local T-Mobile store today. Coverage not available in some areas. Price lock exclusions like taxes, fees, select promos, and third-party services apply. See T-Mobile.com.
Hey everyone, welcome to The Final Four is Not on the Schedule. I'm your host Eric, alongside with expert analyst Rod. Thanks for joining us on the best MSU basketball podcast featuring an in-depth recruiting, game matchup, and post-game analysis. We dive deep to give you the best tools to enjoy the Spartans and impress your friends and family. Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod. We're here to discuss the Big Ten tournament, which is coming up now that all the seeding is done and the craziness of the Big Ten is over, the regular season at least. Before we begin, I just want to send out a thanks to Jerry Mitchell. Well, actually, congratulations. Jerry Mitchell is the winner of our t-shirt contest from the Big Ten tournament, which was, or not the Big Ten tournament, sorry, the Big Ten seeding for the standings, I guess I should say. It's been a weird year because what was it, like a 6th place or 5 team tie for fifth place or something like that?
Or 4th
Iowa, Maryland, Illinois, U of M, and maybe
at 11 and 9.
Yeah,
right?
Maybe Rutgers were they 10 and 10? I can't remember.
That would have been 5th.
Yeah,
Rutgers was 10 and 10.
Anyway, crazy year, and so usually there are a couple of teams that have the same record, but for the most part, it's pretty clear who's the top to bottom. But in that last game, Northwestern was going to go right from 2nd to 9th because of just the weird round robin tiebreakers and such. Had they lost that game to Rutgers, they won it obviously, and so they moved Rutgers down to 9, and they stayed at 2nd, which has to be the best standing ever in the history of Northwestern basketball. Now you could argue that it's kind of because of the weird year it's been, that maybe it's not as legitimate a 2nd as there might have been other years, but they were a good team. And so I think when looking at the winners, we had a tiebreaker. And so Jerry actually tied someone and he had to go to the tiebreaker because, and he got closest to most opponent points scored by Michigan State against Michigan. They're actually off by 1. They actually almost had the exact same amount of points for the tiebreaker as well. But Michigan State only scored 131 points and he had 144. So he was closest, so he wins. And we'll get that t-shirt to him in a little bit. And because of all the way we decided we're going to determine the actual final rankings of the Big Ten was going to be based on the seeding for the Big Ten tournament, just because it's the simplest way, and because of the unbalanced nature of the Big Ten. But not surprisingly, you and I had some of the worst scores, probably because we.
Well, because I'm going to say this. I want to say this in my defense. Michigan State was, in fact, more than likely a rescheduled game against Minnesota from finishing in a tie for 2nd, which is where I picked them.
Right.
So that's the most important call. I'm inclined to claim it, but reasonable minds can disagree. But I think that's pretty good. Now it would not have worked for these purposes because had they played that game and won, I believe they would have ended up with a 3rd seed. Not the 2nd.
Sure, that's entirely.
Yeah, they would
possible.
have because they would have finished. They would have finished by. I'm positive that's true. They would have still finished behind Northwestern, because head-to-head
right
would have given Northwestern the edge, and then Northwestern obviously also had an edge against IU, as we know, because they're the 2 seed and IU's the 3 seed anyway. But I still would have had a legitimate claim to being correct. So I'm gonna claim that one, and that I got that right. And the rest of the league, look, who cares?
Yeah, and I would say, and not surprisingly, the ones that destroyed people's brackets, if you call them, or whatever the predictions, was Northwestern.
Yeah.
People were off anywhere from up to minimum. The best one was 10 spots off, and the worst was someone had them as 14th, and then the other one is Ohio State. So I would go through like, oh, this person has pretty
close. That was definitely the case for me.
And then I hit Ohio State, and then you get like 9.
Yep.
Get Doc 9.
I had Ohio State 4th, and I think I had Northwestern 12th, maybe, or 13th. So I was way off on both of those.
Well, you
in
weren't
opposite
alone.
Directions, but yeah, I would imagine most people were.
Yeah, I think the thing,
but here's the funny thing: put those teams on a neutral court tomorrow. Northwestern's a favorite, but not by a ton. Not by as much as you would normally think from a 2 seed versus a 13, right?
Right.
Which, and that's the thing. I'll say one other in our defense. We got the general tenor of the league correct, that it was going to be incredibly difficult to distinguish between these teams. The only thing we really missed on in that respect, because I maintain that even though Purdue ended up winning this thing by 3 games, I think right now, when you look at them, they are not a team that is separated from the rest of the pack very much, if at all.
Yeah, I agree.
The only thing we missed on is that I think we had talked about it maybe being about that being the case, the inability to distinguish, maybe down to about 10. And it actually extends, I would say, down to 12. And depending upon how you feel about Ohio State at this moment in time, you might even be able to cobble a half-assed argument together to extend it to 13.
Sure.
So that's the only thing we meant, but the general tenor of it we got right.
Yeah, no, I think so too. And clearly people who put their predictions in after, we had our predictions in before the season started. The other people, for the most part, were put it in, probably like the last week before the Big Ten games had started. By that point, there was definitely Purdue had emerged as a really good team, and I think that was something we just didn't know, and that was reflected in the scoring later on as well. But in some respects, 5 to even say 4 to 10 or 11 or so, they're all kind of about the same, right? And that's sort of what you had predicted, and that was kind of how it shook out. And whether Maryland's 6th or 8th, Michigan could have been 5th or 8th based on where the Northwestern won. I mean,
Maryland would have been another team that I missed on a little bit.
Yeah.
They ended up with a 6 seed, but there was a chance they could have been one of the top 4, which would have made it even worse had they gotten a defensive rebound. But
you were really down on that.
But even so, I was, just because first year coach, transfer backcourt, I just didn't think there was a lot of reason to be optimistic about them. But credit to Kevin Willard, he's done a nice job with not a great roster, in my opinion, to get them to where they are. And they're another team like a cast of thousands. If you told me today, hey, come Sunday, they're going to be hoisting the 10 tournament title, I couldn't say I'm shocked, but I can't say I'm shocked by anybody. The flip side of that is I find it really difficult to advocate for anybody winning it either.
Well, sort of like your prediction. You said, I think Indiana's going to win, but I don't think they'll win it.
Well, I picked them first, but I don't think they're going to win it, to be precise.
Yes, right.
Yeah, and that's exactly how it worked out.
So then, I do want to thank Spencer Tanky. I think that's your pronounced name. I apologize. He gave us a one-time gift for you, our Venmo. Left a note saying, love the podcast. Thanks, Spencer. We appreciate it. We appreciate the support and all these other extra content we're giving you, because I know it is March and it is time when we're excited about things, and hopefully you enjoyed the bracket show earlier. So if you want to support the show, you certainly have opportunities. You can either do one of 2 ways. One is you can go to our support page at finalfoursnottheschedule.com/support. There you can give one-time gifts via PayPal or Venmo, or on a recurring basis through Patreon. Or you can visit our sponsors, either Nudge Printing or the brothers that just do gutters, and we'll talk about them later. But so let's talk about the Big Ten tournament. The seeding was really bizarre. Michigan State, came into when they beat Ohio State, I think they could be anywhere from between a 3 and a 7. And so realistically, you thought, they'll be a 5, because all this stuff has to break in order for them to get a double bye. And I don't think either of us probably thought 2 weeks ago there's any chance of them getting a double bye, especially after the Minnesota game got canceled. You thought, well, that's like one other opportunity to get a kind of an easy win to on the docket. And then basically everything that had to happen, including Iowa losing at home inexplicably to Nebraska, So
that's the one that really shocked me. The rest of those results, I've had another podcast and a radio show today, and this has come up. Like, boy, you look at the number of things that had to break right for Michigan State. That's absolutely true. And if you know anything about mathematics, you know that even if the result you want is one that the odds individually are in your favor, when you string them all together, the likelihood of all of them breaking the right way is a lot slimmer than the likelihood of each individual one breaking your way, if you get my drift.
right,
I know
absolutely,
you do.
yeah.
And so that was the challenge, is that, okay, you were essentially rooting for home teams, so you feel decent about that, but are you going to get all of them to break? And in fact, Michigan State did not get all of them to break, because the Northwestern game at Rutgers, which I thought Rutgers backs against the wall at home would find a way to win, was not only did they not win, it was the only game of the day that wasn't close.
Yeah, they got wiped out.
But the flip side was that Nebraska win over Iowa, and we joked about it, I believe, on the last podcast, where we said, well, you'd think Iowa wins, but you never know. Maybe they're stone cold 3, and Tominaga just goes unconscious. Now, he didn't go unconscious, but Nebraska as a team shot the lights out. Absolutely shot the lights out. And that was the difference. And Iowa wasn't terrible from 3, but they weren't great. They didn't shoot the way they have been at home. And that was enough, barely, to get It
reminded me of the game when Rutgers came into East Lansing and they had, 18 offensive rebounds, but it didn't matter because they shot so poorly. Their offense was executing so badly.
Yep.
And Iowa was very much like that. And, that just goes to your point that you talk about every season. You can be really great at something, but you got to be at least decent at the other thing, right? And so this would be defense. And Iowa is so dreadful on defense that they're allowing a team that's not good on offense to look pretty good. And then your chance for success is obviously limited by, you have to be dominant, really dominant one side, and they weren't offensively.
I put it in the show notes. Where are they at defensively right now?
They're 169th or something like that. They're pretty awful, I think.
So it's the 3rd worst team in the McCaffrey era, which is, try to spin that one around in your head, what that means. But they are perilously close. If they have another bad day or two in this tournament and the NCAA tournament, which is entirely possible, they could actually finish as the 2nd worst defensive team. They're very close now to being the 2nd worst. They won't be the worst. That the worst was like 260 something. They're not going to finish that badly, but it is saying a mouthful. And Tom Izzo, I remember before the game in Iowa City, was talking about, I know the metrics say they're bad, but that's a much better defensive team than the numbers say. No, it's not. No, it's not. They're really bad. And when you look at how Nebraska shot yesterday, and then you have to take into account Nebraska is a rough offensive
team.
Right.
Exactly.
Like, their improvement has been because they're competent defensively now. But that is not a good shooting team, and they shot the lights out against Iowa. It is not an accident. Iowa gives you great looks, and they just can't guard anybody.
Yeah.
And it bit them. So that was the surprise. But yeah, things just kept falling right for Michigan State. The Penn State win over Maryland, where it really looked like they were done. But with that team, that's the problem with playing against Penn State. When you've got a team that shoots as many threes and shoots them as well as that team does, they're never fully out of a game. And boy, I was talking about this with another podcast host earlier today. If I was a Maryland fan, I would feel just about the same way I felt as a Michigan State fan of the game in Iowa City, where the smallest on the floor, in this case it was Winter for Penn State, is the guy who gets the putback to win it. It would drive you crazy.
Yeah. And it was that was actually a bit of a disappointing game, the Iowa game, for our family personally, because of course my wife's an Iowa fan, and so now Michigan State and Iowa will have to face each other likely on Friday. So the way it's going to work out, we'll talk about Michigan State first. So Michigan State will play the winner of the Iowa versus the winner of the Ohio State-Wisconsin game. Interestingly, Iowa is 1-3 against those two teams. They were swept by Wisconsin. They split with Ohio State. They were one of Ohio State's 4 wins or something like that in the Big Ten. It's going to be it'll be interesting. I guess the Ohio State-Wisconsin games are an interesting one. Our assumption here probably is that, Wisconsin, their metrics are okay-ish, right? Like they look like they might still, even though they're 12 seed in the Big Ten, they've got enough good wins that they're in the conversation. They're certainly in the bubble somewhere. And,
yeah, I think the consensus seems to be they are right there in like the last 1 or 2 of the play-in game spots right now. But it's look, they can't afford a loss to Ohio State.
Correct.
That much I'm convinced of. Like, the question becomes, do they also need to beat Iowa? I would say probably not, would be my guess. I mean, we're going to talk to our bracketologist friend, Dom, here shortly. That episode might actually air before this
will.
one. I'm
so
not
you
sure.
already know the answer.
Okay. So you already know the answer. We'll see what Dom had to say. My guess is that's where he's going to land, but I would also feel, certainly if I were a Wisconsin fan, beating Ohio State but losing to Iowa, you're going to be very nervous come 6:00 on Sunday. That's just, you would not feel comfortable. I think they'd get in that scenario, but all it takes is, one bid stealer. Like, could be a major conference team that goes off and wins their conference tournament. Could be something else. It's possible. And you certainly wouldn't feel comfortable. So Wisconsin's got a lot of pressure on them right now to find a way, I think, to really feel safe to win 2.
Yeah, I think there's no question about that. And that's the thing. Like, it's easy for us to say, oh, Wisconsin's this or that, but we're not paying attention to the other 25 games all over the country that are, other teams that are in the bubble or around there. Right. And, someone gets hot in a tournament, and it doesn't even necessarily have to be someone who wins a conference tournament that's not unexpected. It could be just someone who, was one game away, and they tend to play. They're playing a better team. It's more of a quad 1 victory than like a Wisconsin beating quad 3 or something.
Beats Alabama, right? And in the
exactly.
SEC tournament, absolutely.
Yeah, so that's why probably you say the 2 seed. So, the assumption is that Wisconsin, they beat Ohio State earlier in the season in Columbus. That's when Ohio State was playing really badly. I think Ohio State is playing better now. They definitely look like they got a little more punch to them than they did previously. So I was going to have their hands full, and I mean, it's strange because you think Iowa should be able to handle Wisconsin, yet they really struggle against Wisconsin both times. The first time they didn't have Chris Murray, so you're like, well, that's why they lost at home to Wisconsin. But the second time, I guess it's Madison, but a game you would expect them to win, but they didn't. And so it's going to be a motivated Wisconsin team, and Iowa is in the tournament no matter what happens. But I don't know. You'd expect them to pull off.
Realistically, what's Iowa playing for? You have to look at motivation now. You could say, well, maybe they want to win the Big Ten tournament. I'm not sure how much seating room there is for them, but it's probably like a lot of these teams in that, 7, 8, 9-ish range. Maybe with a run, you go up a line, maybe.
Yeah.
So I definitely would think Wisconsin has a little more motivation at play here if they are the matchup. And if Ohio State's the matchup, look, Ohio State is just trying to extend their season and spoil other people's day.
Yeah, right.
And sometimes that works.
Yeah,
the team is able to be loose.
Yeah, right, exactly.
The dream would probably be for Michigan State to be facing Ohio State, because not only are they the worst team of these 3, but it would be a third game in 3 days. I guess Wisconsin would be the same scenario, but they're a little better team. Either of those would probably be preferable, though, just because you figure, Iowa is maybe be a little nervous because they're playing a team that's got a game under their belt. Sometimes that seems to be an equation that, but if you're playing a team on their third game in 3 days, that can be a little tougher. And, especially Ohio State, not a lot of depth. They're not running a lot of bodies in and out of there. So that could really play negatively for them if they were able to get through. Yeah. But look, when push comes to shove, I agree Ohio State's playing better. They're certainly capable of winning that game, but I would make Wisconsin a slight favorite. To me, the only 2 games that I feel ultra confident in right now out of everything would be the Wednesday games. I think Nebraska will handle Minnesota. Yep. And I think Wisconsin has enough to get by Ohio State. After that, man.
Yeah, it's a crapshoot, right?
You're going blind into a sack and pulling out a winner.
Yeah,
through all these games.
For Michigan State, you'd say, well, Ohio State, Wisconsin, Iowa. Michigan State's 4-1, and you could almost argue they're 5-0 if they not had that monumental collapse at Iowa City.
Yeah, but then you could also say the win over Iowa, maybe they didn't earn.
Right, yeah.
So,
but either way, they should handle whatever the team they play. They should be able to. And I always wonder, the whole motivation thing is interesting because, I think there are teams that are just like sliding into oblivion, and there are teams that are fighting to get in. And I've always heard the claim, and Brad Underwood was 2 years ago or last year said, we wanted rest for the NCAA tournament. We didn't care
last year. Yeah. Brilliant.
And you hear people say that all the time, like, Izzo doesn't really care about this, or.
And six championships say otherwise,
right? And then even I think it was just Graham Couch. He's like, well, that year that Lawyer hit all those threes against Ohio State, was it 2 years ago or something? And then they went on to win. It
was the 19 season.
Yeah, right. And they ended up beating Michigan, I think, in the finals there. That was he was arguing. Well, Michigan State was happy just to go to the NCAA tournament and not worry about it. And I think there's probably. I don't know. I have a hard time believing a lot of these players, at least in Michigan State, I can't imagine them not wanting to keep winning and beat teams. And especially when you have a team like Michigan State that is still trying to kind of get things worked out, right? Like the more chances you have to work this out before you get to the NCAA tournament, the better. And so you have every reason to really, that's got to be enough motivation. If that doesn't motivate you, there's some problem with you, with your team, I think.
Look, it's fan talk. I mean, I think that the thing you can say about it is if you lose, you can look at it differently than a regular season loss. A regular season loss, there's really no upside. There's definitely no upside to an NCAA tournament loss because your season's over.
Right.
This is one of those rare occasions where you can, without having to strain too hard, find an upside. And the upside is, well, at least we get more rest. Right.
Yeah.
So it's a nice situation in that you don't have to feel too badly about a loss. If you get to the final and you lose, that's a tough one because you got all the downsides supposedly of having to play 3-3 or 4-4, whatever it is, and you don't even win the championship. But other than that, if Michigan State beats Iowa and loses to Purdue, let's say, you could shrug your shoulders and say, yeah, all right, well, better to get the extra day of rest, right? You can rationalize it a little easier. And and it's not a total rationalization. There can be some level of truth to it, but I guarantee you these guys want to win. They want to win it.
Yeah.
And any other stuff like, genius Brad Underwood said is post hoc rationalization. It's just I don't take it seriously. It sounds nice and you can talk yourself into it, but these teams want to win. I think the biggest deal though is this, and it was true for Michigan State last year. If you remember last year, Michigan State, if I remember correctly, beat Maryland and then lost to Purdue. Very well played, competitive game. They were in it the whole way, had chances to up just short.
Yep.
But they came out of that game. Well, I know I did, and I'm sure they did. Actually, still feeling pretty good about where they were.
Right. Yeah.
That was not a negative outcome in the sense that, you wanted to win, but the more important thing was they played well.
Right. They didn't lose by 20.
That's what you wanted. Right. And so the same thing holds here. If they were to lose in a semifinal, whether it be against Purdue or somebody else, but they played well, they just happen to lose. Okay, that you can still feel that you're building momentum going into the real tournament, So again, it's one of these things where you don't want to lose, but the right kind of loss doesn't really have. I mean, just think back over all the years that Michigan State plays in the Big Ten tournament and loses. Are you really crushed? I mean, there's a handful of years where it really, really mattered, in 12 against Ohio State, because it was a rubber match. And those were just two Titan type teams that mattered. The year you just mentioned, and there have been a couple of them against Michigan. Those mattered because it's them.
Yeah.
But, in other years, like the 2015, they get to the final and they lose narrowly against Wisconsin in Chicago. And there was a bad out of bounds call that might have cost Michigan State that game. You still disappointing to not win it. But I don't remember feeling badly. I remember feeling this team has found itself.
Yeah,
and sure enough, they validated that by getting to the Final Four. So that's really what matters most here is how well are you playing? I actually saw Jim Comparoni make what I do think was a good point along these lines, going back to that loss in Iowa City. And he said, 38 of those 40 minutes, Michigan State might have played its best basketball of the season. And the way that the last 2 minutes is, I think the word he used was carnival basketball, the term.
Yeah.
And that's about right. That's what it was. Didn't change that. So yeah, it's crushing to lose that way. It was disappointing to everybody. But when you take a look at the bigger picture, what you should have concluded was, hey, they still played pretty damn well.
Yeah.
And the fact that freakish things happened doesn't obliterate what you saw in those first 38 minutes. And sure enough, I think with what they did in Lincoln and then at Breslin has validated that. So the biggest thing for Michigan State, more than wins and losses or where they happen, is you want to see that continue. You want to feel good going into the real tournament and that you've got momentum built up that way, regardless of whether you win or lose.
Yeah. There's certainly not that finality that you get in an NCAA tournament. Or, yeah, like you said, the regular season, you don't like those wins. But, in this season, had they won the Iowa game, it would have made no difference in the Big Ten tournament or your Big Ten regular season.
It just would have been a slightly different seed.
Yeah.
Would have been a slightly different seed.
Which,
they would have been the 2 seed. If they'd won the Iowa game, they would have ended up the 2 seed. But does that really make a whole hell of a lot of difference? Because as opposed to the way maybe you felt a month ago, I don't actually think it's that big of a deal, being on Purdue's side of the bracket.
I don't either.
I really don't.
I actually kind of want another chance at them, to be honest.
Yeah, there's an argument for that, for sure. But, that's not to say they're not still a very good team. They're a good team, but I've been saying it all year. They're not a juggernaut. And I think the last 3 weeks has validated that as well.
Yeah.
They're not. They're a good team, but they're a good team that can get got. And if Michigan State, I'll tell you what, the thing you like about it from Michigan State perspective is you may have a chance to play them. And if they are, as it appears, kind of teetering on that 6-7 line, getting a win against Purdue might mean enough to make a difference. That is the one game that's possible to play in this tournament that really individually might be, we'll talk with Dom about that. Again, you guys will have already heard that, but to see what he thinks about that, because we did have a discussion with him last time where he seemed to suggest that he doesn't believe the Saturday games, definitely not the Sunday, but even the Saturday games don't necessarily mean a lot for the seed line. But given this weird year and how closely bunched all these teams are nationally, not just the Big Ten, I would think that getting a win over Purdue might actually be meaningful for MSU, especially if you're only talking about the difference between, say, being the 25th team overall and the 24th team, which would be the difference between a 7 or a 6.
Right.
I could see that.
Sure. Yeah, definitely. And, as we go, we're going to work through the brackets just a little bit further. But before we do that, it's funny. When it comes to filling out these brackets, and I think this year has been a lot like, it's going to be a lot like this, where it's a crapshoot to try and figure out who's going to do things. And And so you really have to be an expert. And so I look at like, this is kind of funny, lead into discussion about gutters. But I don't know anything about gutters except that the water drains off my roof. And so I need someone who knows what they're doing. And, Marge of the office, picking out her brackets based on mascots or something like that. That's probably not the way you want to do it. And it's probably not the way you want to take care of the water issues in your house. So I would recommend if you're out in the west side of the state, Grand Rapids area, all the way out to Saugatuck, out to Lowell, up to Rockford, get a hold of Kurt Stauffer and his team at Brothers Who Just Do Gutters. That's all they do. They just do gutters, and they specialize in that, and they do great work. They took care of mine. They can repair yours. They can clean out the leaves and all the junk, put gutter guards on. They can replace the whole thing. Whatever you need done, they can do it. And you'll get 10% off if you mention Final Four. Just contact Kurt Stauffer at kurt.stauffer at brothersgutters.com. You can find links to that in the show notes. So looking at the bracket, Michigan State will be facing the winner of the 8-9 game. 8-9 game is Michigan-Rutgers, and that is a game that I think probably both feel this way. It's kind of a play-in game for the NCAA tournament. I don't know that if Michigan wins that they're in. I suspect they aren't, but I think if Rutgers loses, they're finished. I think Michigan still need another game.
I agree with all. I would change the definition of that, though. I think it's an elimination game.
Sure. Yeah.
In other words, play-in game might suggest that if you win it, you're in, and definitely don't think that's the case with Michigan. It might or might not be the case with Rutgers. But definitely whoever loses it seems likely to be out. Which is crazy saying it about Rutgers because you think back to even 4 weeks ago.
They've played themselves out, haven't they?
They've lost 8.
Yeah.
And you looked at that injury that they had to what's his name? Mag.
Yeah.
The power forward. And at the time, I thought, well, that's a blow. He's been a good player for them, but you didn't think that would coincide with the total derailment. But it has. And I think what it's shown is he was a more important part. And this is the stuff that's so hard to predict. And it goes both ways. Sometimes, I was just on Jack Ebling's show this afternoon, and he was suggesting that, ask the question, is Michigan better without Jet Howard?
Right.
And I think the answer is yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, that seems counterintuitive when you're talking about your second leading scorer, but I think it's true. And you can't always easily predict these things. What's the domino effect going to be of this guy or that guy being taken out of the lineup? Sometimes it's a positive for you, and sometimes it's negative. And in this case, for Rutgers, I think it's proven to be a negative. They were not a great offensive team anyway, and that guy wasn't a great offensive player individually. But I look at Mulcahy, and he is not the same guy. I mean, that game yesterday against Northwestern, he couldn't do anything.
He looked weird.
And if he's not being dynamic, I don't know how Rutgers scores. And sure enough, he really didn't score against Northwestern. So it's all changed for them negatively. And I'm not defending Steve Peichel by any means for what happened with the rescheduling of a game, but I will say this. At least selfishly from his perspective, you can understand why he thought the way he did. Now, I still don't think it was the right decision, but I get it. He would know better than any of us where his team was at. And you look how it's unfolded. I think it's pretty clear he saw, hey, I can't make it any harder on my guys than it already is because we're fast and we're in danger of, playing our way at this thing. And sure enough, that's what's happened.
Yeah.
But they still have a chance. I do think it's an elimination game. It will be fascinating from that perspective. If you're a Michigan fan, I guess you can.
I think you like that.
You feel
draw.
Pretty well. Yeah. Of anybody that you could have gotten in that game, yes, you do, because Rutgers is the team that's clear cut playing badly.
Yeah.
But in this year's Big Ten, does that mean anything?
Yeah.
It tends to mean that the opposite is just around the corner. Either way, right?
Yeah.
So you'd be a little nervous around that. I will say this about Michigan. I agree with you that this isn't enough. I don't think just beating Rutgers is enough. But if you are a Michigan fan, maybe counterintuitively, your path broke the best way possible. Because if you were sitting playing a quarterfinal game against, I don't know, Penn State, you would then have to question, well, gosh, is that enough? Or do we have to go get a third win?
Right.
To solidify a bid? You've got an opportunity against Purdue. If you beat Purdue, after having beaten Rutgers, I think you're in.
I think so too.
I really do. I think that's all it takes. Purdue would be that meaningful. And if you're Michigan, the other thing is, you're one of the teams best positioned to give Purdue some problems in one sense, in that you've got maybe the only physical matchup in the conference, which you don't necessarily have to get freakish or distort what you normally do in order to go up against Edey. Because Dickinson isn't as big as Edey, but he's the closest we've got. And so if you're Michigan, maybe you don't have to do what everybody else is doing, where you're blitzing him.
Yeah.
Maybe you can afford to play it a little more straight up at times. And Dickinson, I still think overall, because of the nature of the way the sport is played today, overall miserably bad defender. But I do have to give him credit. He has become, and you saw it in the Indiana game, he has become a decent rim protector.
Yeah.
And so and look, Zach Edey is not going to torch you in pick and roll. Purdue in total really is not a great pick and roll team, and they don't run as much of it as other people do, for obvious reasons. So, you've got a chance to hang in there against that team, maybe a little differently than most other teams. And they almost got Purdue at Chrysler. That was a competitive game. So we'll see. But if I'm a Michigan fan, I don't know that you could say you love it, because your backs are still against the wall pretty seriously. But at least you've got a path that you could say, well, this is reasonable.
No question.
If we win these games, we're in. But the flip side of it is, you had that equation in Champaign, that equation in Bloomington. You got both of those teams not playing anything close to their A games at home. I was really surprised by Indiana. I thought they would bounce back better than they did to that Iowa debacle. And I really didn't think they played particularly well, and they still tired. But if you're Michigan, the chances were there, and you didn't put off overtime both games. You couldn't get it done. So if you're handicapping this, why are you going to have faith that they'll pull it off now?
Yeah, it's interesting because, when I look at the teams trying to envision, who can win the Big Ten tournament here, Michigan's actually a team that's high on my list. I mean, like a team that, because they're playing much better than they were earlier this year. They've come up short, but they've, 2 back-to-back overtime games on the road against really good teams, Illinois and Indiana. So you're kind of like, this team could probably, make a run at people and do stuff, but they're not able to close out. But again, those are both road games. So I don't know. I mean, I think they'll definitely give Purdue a challenge, and I wouldn't be shocked if Michigan State advances if they are facing Michigan. I don't think I wouldn't be totally stunned if that would be the case.
Yeah, it would be, that would be an interesting semifinal matchup, right? I'm still of the opinion that Michigan does not get it. I'm not a believer. I will say this: Hunter Dickinson is more engaged than he was out of the season, and therefore he's producing better. But he still has the flaw he has, and so that's a problem.
Yeah.
The question is, are Rutgers and or Purdue built to exploit those best? And I'm not sure they are. But be that as it may, I think that the biggest question for me, and I've seen a lot of Michigan lamenting of this yesterday and today, Michigan has been absolutely miserable in late game situations. You saw it again yesterday.
Yeah.
The last possession in overtime, what do they do?
That was bizarre.
Well, not the last one. I'm sorry. The last possession in regulation.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
What do they? The last possession in overtime was another botch. But the last possession in regulation, what do? They have the ball and Jet Howard And that's exactly what happened in the game at Chrysler, which was also the win on a last possession. And same deal, almost the same spot on the floor, as a matter of fact. The left sideline they were inbounding from, and it was the wing that Jet was trying to happen. That is not what should happen. If you watch that game against Indiana, it was pretty clear to me. You put the ball in Kobe Buffkin's hands and you let him go make a play. Maybe he finds Dickinson near the rim. Maybe he goes to make a play for himself. But that's the guy I would have trusted. Instead, they put it in Jet Howard's hands, and Jet Howard is just not going to make those plays. Do you give it to Doug McDaniel in those situations? Well, he's a freshman, and he's made some plays this year. He's played better, but do you trust him in a big? I don't trust him. I just think in big moments, they've wilted consistently this year. Their record in close games is horrible, and as a result, their KenPom luck rating is among the 50 worst in the country. And that's what happens. You're not winning games that the metrics otherwise say you should, and it's happening a lot. You're end up with a bad luck number. That's how that works. He's a little opaque about how he calculates it, but that's a sweet and simple description of what's going on. But I think at this point, I don't think luck is the right word for it. I think that it's a team that's from the get-go has kind of never felt cohesive. And I don't know that I have a lot of faith in the head coach in those moments. He hasn't given a lot of reason to have faith, certainly not this year. And so when I think about this big tournament, maybe it'll be different than this, but I kind of expect we're going to see something of a rerun of what it was. There'll be a lot of games that come down to the final minute.
Yeah.
Because there isn't a lot of difference between these teams. And now we're on neutral floors, not home and away. And in those moments, man, how can you pick Michigan against anybody? I mean, I think they're going to need to deliver in moments like that if they're to get this done. And I just don't have any faith in them. I think they can be competitive in this game or games, but I don't think they're going to win both.
Yeah.
I just don't.
I'll
admit there's some hopeful thinking on my part going on there, but I think I've actually got, it's not just a win and a prayer. I mean, I think I've got, there's some definitive reasons why I think you can point to that as a likely outcome.
So before we get to the bottom of the bracket and take a look at that real quick, let's talk about Nudge Printing, the other great sponsor for our show. Nudge Printing, run by two Michigan State alums, Gabe and Brittany. They supply Michigan State apparel, vintage and current stuff. They have all the unique designs, tuck coming, those sorts of things. You can check out all their stuff at nudgeprinting.com. They also have a collection for our show. So if you want to support our show and get some great Nudge Printing Spartan apparel, you can get the Final Fours on the schedule, either a shirt or a hoodie. I wore the hoodie to when I won my free throw contest at the Breslin. Super comfortable. You can get that at the Final Fours on the schedule.com/merchandise. And then you can get to our collection. And then from there, you can purchase all the other stuff at Nudge Printing. And then all the proceeds from those two shirts go to our show to help support us. But they have all kinds of other stuff, decals, wall stickers, everything. And then they don't just have Spartan stuff. They also have other schools. We mentioned in the past that most of the Michigan schools in around Western, Eastern, Northern, Lake State, Michigan Tech, all those schools. They don't have University of Michigan, thankfully. And you can also get the Spartan Strong shirts. I think they've got those back. I think they ran out. They printed over 15,000. So I think they're making another run for that. So that's a way to support the shooting victims from the February 13th incident on campus. So check them out at nudgeprinting.com. You can get 20% off using the coupon code FINAL4 at checkout.
What's up, everybody? It's Kate and Michelle from Draft Queens, the podcast making sports and fantasy football more awesome for everybody.
We're coming to you weekly with NFL start-sit advice, breakdowns of the hottest sports headlines, and maybe even a few friendly sports bets.
So go on, follow Draft Queens now wherever you listen to podcasts as part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network.
The midway point of the NBA season is here, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because new customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scorers and threes drained. I love mixing it up by betting against the spread, taking the over on Giannis's points every chance I get, and more exclusive bets like the 2x3, 2-3 scored in the first 3 minutes. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine bets like those for a chance at a bigger payout with a same-game parlay. So don't miss the chance to get your no-sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/Blue Wire. That's FanDuel.com/Blue Wire to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. 21 plus in select states. First online real money wager only. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable free bets that expires in 14 days. Restrictions apply. See terms at sportsbook.fanduel.com. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit fanduel.com/RG in New Jersey.
So let's look at it. I think it's kind of interesting looking at the bottom of the bracket because, the first playing game is Nebraska-Minnesota. I think we both think Nebraska is going to win that game. And Nebraska is a team that I don't know that I'd want to play Nebraska. It's a team that's pretty tough. They played Michigan State tough. I mean, obviously Michigan State ended up winning with a big second half, but they went into Carver Hawkeye and beat the Hawkeyes. They'd won 5 of 6 before they played Michigan State. And going up against a Maryland team that's, I don't know, Maryland, if they're not in College Park, I don't know about this team. So right. It's a game you certainly could say, I could see Nebraska winning that. And then
for sure.
Right. And then,
sure.
Tominaga goes crazy and then they play Indiana, right? I don't know.
This is what I'd say. The thing about Nebraska that would scare you is two things. One that you mentioned, I mean, they've won 6 of their last 8.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So they know they're going to the postseason. They're going to get an NIT invite, it seems. So that's a big deal for Fred Hoiberg's program. And I think, he's not going to win Coach of the Year. Chris Collins obviously has a better claim, and so does Matt Painter. But, man, he'd probably be third on my list.
Yep.
Because that was a remarkable job to turn that thing around this year. But they're playing well, and they also have 0 to lose. I mean, they have nothing to lose. And that's where it can get dangerous sometimes. Sometimes you could say that about a team that's typically in that, they're out of the NCAA tournament conversation and say, well, they've got nothing to lose. Like, yeah, it's because they're pretty bad. But Nebraska, it's a combination of where Nebraska, the level they're playing at right now, and the fact that there's nobody in the Big Ten that's good enough that they can look at that and say, this is a walkover.
Yeah.
The gap is not that big. So, yeah, you're right. I mean, give credit to Minnesota. Minnesota has started to play a little better here late. They snuck out a win. They were very close to derailing Wisconsin last night and then didn't get it done. But they're playing a little bit better. But still, I would expect Nebraska to beat them. And then a Nebraska-Maryland game, neutral court. I mean, it's like all the rest of these games. I say flip a coin.
Yeah.
I'm sure Maryland will be favored, but they shouldn't be favored by a lot. Nebraska has, with Walker inside, they can counter what Reese gives Maryland. And so from there, it really comes down to guard play. And the Nebraska guards, I would take Maryland over them, but not by a lot.
Yeah. Well, and then you go up to the 7-10 matchup, Illinois-Penn State. Interesting because Penn State ran Illinois out of their own gym earlier in the season. And, talk about Coach of the Year, Shrewsbury's not going to win any award, but to pull off what he's managed at Penn State with no big men, I mean, it's pretty remarkable that he's coached like a totally kind of different way than normal. I think normally he wants to because of his personnel. And so the fact that they've been so competitive is really impressive.
On another podcast today, I was asked which game other than one Michigan State, or it's a Wisconsin podcast I was on, other than Michigan State or Wisconsin, are you most interested in seeing? And this was my choice.
Yeah.
And Penn State's in an interesting position. It feels to me like that win yesterday got them in. And I tend to think even a loss to Illinois doesn't take them out. But man, they don't want to be going through Sunday.
Yeah, they'd be sweating
leading into the selection show thinking about that. They really want to win. Illinois, I don't know how much movement is possible for them. They're solidly in, but are they going to be able to jump much? I don't think so.
And not playing Penn State, right? And even the next round would be Northwestern. I don't think those are teams that move the needle a ton for their seeding, right? Going to Saturday.
Now, that doesn't necessarily, we can look at that and say, well, where's the motivation? But you're not that locker room. You also got to keep in mind, Penn State didn't just sweep Illinois. They pounded them.
Yeah.
Double-digit wins, home and away. And so what is that? Is that a fluke? Is it just one of those things? Is it meaningful in that? Is there a matchup problem that Penn State's been able to exploit? And you can't throw that one aside because Penn State plays, as you were talking about, such an unconventional style that maybe there is. I will say this. I think much as we've seen in a couple recent games from Illinois, I think even more so in this one, Penn State might force Illinois to take Danger off the floor.
Yeah, right.
More than they would like to, because he just can't get out and defend. He's really good protecting the rim and he's a weapon in the post, but he can't extend out on the floor. And Penn State forces you. I mean, they are above anybody else in this league. The way that they play, you got to be able to have a 5-man who can extend defensively. So that changes things for Illinois a little bit too. I'm going to be fascinated to see it. You would certainly think the one thing that might give Illinois motivation is this team smacked them twice.
Yeah, for sure.
So, and they always say, oh, it's a cliche. It's so hard to beat a team a third time. Okay. But
not if you're better.
They gotta go do it.
Yeah.
I don't think Penn State is necessarily better objectively, but it might be that they just have Illinois' number for whatever reason. And I can think of some, like I just mentioned, they force Illinois to play. The other thing too is, I don't know if it's clear yet. I haven't seen it. Is Epps going to play or not?
Right. I was going to ask about
because
that.
I think Illinois really somehow skated. I mean, if you watch that Purdue game, especially down the stretch, Coleman Hawkins was their point guard.
That was weird. Yeah.
I mean, you can say, okay, Coleman Hawkins is pretty versatile. Good for him. But that's an indictment of what they've got right now in terms of guard play. So that's and I heard somebody on a national podcast talk, Terrence Shannon is a playmaker. Well, what world is Terrence Shannon a playmaker? He's a guy who can get his own points. He's not going to run your offense.
Yeah.
So that's where Illinois got a problem right now. And even with Epps, I don't think their guard plays great, but it's better. So are they going to have him? Are they not? Who knows? But I think that's a fascinating game. And I just really want to see Penn State in this tournament. As a neutral fan, I love watching them play.
Yeah.
They're just such a fun, weird team. I wouldn't want it to be my team, because there are limitations built in. But as a neutral, it's fun to watch.
Yeah. So they would take on the Northwestern, who's a team that is the 2 seed, but I don't think, and then you have Indiana down to the 3. I tell you what, I look at this bracket and I think to myself, if you were to ever have like a totally bizarre 10 versus 11, like Penn State, Nebraska go in the semifinals, you wouldn't think it's totally impossible, right? I mean, this is the kind of,
not at all.
This is the kind of thing you could totally see that happening. And I mean, I don't know. I mean, then you have a Nebraska. State. Maybe you have someone really threatening to make someone who's totally out of the tournament stealing a bid for the first time in the Big Ten.
I picked Penn State to go all the way through. I think Nebraska's problem, if Nebraska had made it to the Thursday games, I'd give them that tiny Buster Douglas in Tokyo or wherever it was against Tyson Chance. I would give puncher's chance. I think having to play 5-5 is a bridge too far.
Yeah.
I think that's what would stop them. But somebody could pull off a 4-4.
Well,
and I
would
have
last
picked
year.
Penn State.
Yeah.
Right. It's happened. Not a lot, but it's happened. I picked Penn State on that Wisconsin podcast I was on to get through this half of the bracket. As I put it, I said, if you've been following the coverage of U.S. intelligence services assessment of the lab leak theory around what happened in Wuhan at the outset of COVID. The intelligence agencies assign high confidence, medium confidence, low confidence. And I said, my pick of Penn State and Purdue in a final is in the basement. That's how low the confidence is. But it is what I picked. Northwestern is really interesting. I watched that Northwestern Rutgers game, and because that was the last one that had any implications for Michigan State. And I was really impressed by Northwestern. I know they had not been playing particularly well lately, but I'll tell you what I saw as a difference for them yesterday. There's a guy from Clarkston, Michigan named Matt Nicholson, who's their starting center. And Matt Nicholson is really coming on defensively. He was a problem in that Rutgers game. I mean, Omarui is a pretty good center, right?
Yeah.
He gave Michigan State some problems this year. Matt Nicholson just dominated him, in my opinion. And I don't mean he went out and scored 30 points or anything, but he owned the paint in that game. And that is giving, and he's been good all year, but he's getting better, in my opinion. And defensively, especially. And you put that together with what their perimeter guys do defensively and, just their whole strategic approach. They kind of swarm you. They pressure you without not full court trapping pressure, but they get into you.
Yeah, they trap a lot, especially down.
You put it all in the half court. They do. Yeah. And you put all that together, and they've still got problems at the offensive end, and we talk about all the time with them. If their guards aren't scoring, they're done. And those guards can get into rhythms where they are taking miserable shots. That can still happen. But man, that defense travels and it shows up. And if someone were to pick Northwestern to win this thing, I couldn't say that would be crazy. If you ranked teams 1 through 14, I don't think very many people are saying Northwestern is truly the second best team, even though they're seated that way.
Right.
But they've got enough that, what happens if Bowie and Audige are out of their minds for 3 days? Northwestern probably wins it.
Sure. And so then, you obviously said you thought it was Purdue and Penn State.
Let's maybe talk about the other.
I was going to say the other Indiana,
the
right? So the other thing is Indiana. So Indiana's going to play the winner Maryland versus, we suspect, Nebraska. Indiana's a team that, boy, you really want to like them. Like, you really want to feel like they've got a ways to go. And yet they just, at times they seem sort of, I don't know, they're not as quite as disconnected or kind of random as they have been as they were last year, maybe.
No,
but I still think that they are not quite. There's still something kind of missing, and I'm not sure what it is.
Well, I would say two things. One is a long-term thing we've been talking about since before the season started. Their guard play to me is a limiter. Now it's better than it was, and they finally, decided that Xavier Johnson's not coming back, which I think is in everybody's best interest. Because I think that really had the potential to screw him up.
Yeah.
Hood Schifino is a big time talent. 6'7" point guard, good handle, capable passer, capable shooter. He can do a lot of things. He's going to be in the NBA next year. I'm reasonably certain. The problem with Schifino is for what he is, he's a freshman. And so if you look at the pattern he's had for much of the season, it's 1 game on, 1 game off, 1 game on, 1 game off. When you're in a tournament setting, you really can't afford that.
Yeah, right.
You need guys to be there every day. And I don't think we've been, at least as of yet, given any reason to think the Hood Schifino is capable of being on 3 days in a row. So that's one problem. Second problem with their guards is I look at, Trey Galloway, I like as a glue guy. He's high energy. He's been a good shooter this year, decent passer. He does a lot of things at least okay to good. And it's important to have guys like that. But I think you think back to Michigan State's run to the Final Four in 2019. Matt McQuaid was their third or fourth, how you felt about Aaron Henry, offensive option in the offense, right?
Mm-hmm.
but Matt McQuaid had big games.
Yeah.
Big games of the Big Ten tournament, big games of the NCAA. You need that typically to make a run in a tournament setting. You need that third or fourth guy to pop up with the occasional 17-point game. I don't know if I believe Trey Galloway's got that in.
Yeah.
I just and then when you talk about Bates, if this tournament was being played at Assembly Hall, I'd say all bets are off. But it's not. And so do you have any faith in him on a neutral court?
Not at all. Yeah.
I don't know. So that's a problem that's been there all along, which is, are Indiana's guards good enough to get it done multiple times in short succession? And I think that's a very legitimate thing to doubt. But the other thing that's reared its head lately that I would be worried about if I were an Indiana fan is, and I've been saying this for a couple of weeks now, they look tired to me. I thought, they and credit to them that a couple of times in the stretch, including yesterday, they were still able to get a win. But that was at home.
Right.
Other than lately, say over the past 2 weeks, other than the game at Purdue, they have looked like a tired team to me. And the Purdue game, you could understand why that would be an outlier because it's a rivalry game. They're getting jacked up for it. You would think, okay, that's a day adrenaline might carry you over the line, and it did. But other than that, Michigan State handled them easily at Breslin. They didn't look like close to the same team they looked like at Assembly Hall.
Right.
Iowa went into Assembly Hall and blew the doors off them. And then Michigan, they got the win, but I felt during large portions of that game like they were just in a little bit of quicksand. And credit to Trace Jackson Davis and Race Thompson. They made a lot of plays late, but even Trace, I don't think his motor was quite where it was, say, a month ago. And it's understandable. It's a long season and guys have had to shoulder a heavy load. Indiana doesn't have a super deep bench and it's understandable, but that's what if that doesn't get changed, they're going to have a short postseason stay in either of these tournaments. They need to get energized, re-energized somehow, because I thought what made Indiana look the best they've looked all season was, say, 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, when Trace Jackson Davis was like a whirling dervish out there. He was everywhere. He wasn't the only one. Like, they were really playing with a lot of energy. And when they can't do that or don't do that, I think they become a much more pedestrian team.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's spot on. So, looking at the field, I think it's probably safe to say anyone playing on Wednesday is not going to win the whole thing. You probably could. Yeah. Maybe you could say, I guess I would give Nebraska a 0.5% chance and the rest zeros. So if you just go from the top to the bottom, go ahead.
Well, I was talking about this with a Wisconsin podcaster, and I said, if you're Wisconsin, I don't think you want to win it. You don't want to have played 5 games in 5 days and then go to the NCAA tournament, right? Well, so it's not even in your best interest.
Right.
The other 3 teams, yes, because it's their only ticket. But if you're Wisconsin, I think you're fine with 1-2 and then losing to Michigan State. That's just about perfect because it's enough to get you in, but it's not enough to leave you drained and have nothing in the tank come the tournament, the real tournament. So regardless, I don't think anybody from that group is winning it. I think Wisconsin and Nebraska, you would give each of those teams a very low percentage chance of doing it. Wisconsin, I would actually give a little more if they weren't in that 5-5 scenario.
Right. Yeah.
Because I don't think there's a lot of difference. Do I think on a neutral floor, Wisconsin could upset Purdue? Yes, I do. Which shows you there just isn't much difference. How many years do we say that about a 12 versus a 1 in this thing? Almost never.
Yeah, and then you look at, just kind of going through the team, I'd say the next least likely team to win, my guess would be Rutgers. Because I can't imagine winning 4 games the way they've been looking recently.
No.
And then I don't know.
I agree with you.
And then I don't know. Maybe it's probably Maryland. I hard time see Maryland win 4 games in a row as well.
I think that there are teams in that Thursday group that I think have a chance. But I think that, like Iowa, for example.
Yeah, they could get hot. And
if Iowa gets red hot from 3, yeah, could they shoot their way to 4-4? Maybe. Yeah. It's just there wouldn't be many possible results that would be totally shocking to me. Because this conference is just, it's day to day, or as we've seen, sometimes it's even a half to half.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. Right? How many, Illinois comes back from 24 down in the second half and almost wins it in West Lafayette. Who had that?
Yeah.
It's just, we saw what happened obviously with Iowa and Michigan State, on and on. Penn State down big late and came back and won. These things just keep happening. So that makes it all very unpredictable in my mind.
Yeah, I think overall you have to figure that Purdue, I mean, not surprisingly, is probably your best chance, but I don't know who I'd say is number 2 chance of winning the whole thing. I mean, I don't know where Michigan State is in there, but I think they're top 3 of winning the whole thing. I don't know. They just have to get through Purdue.
Here's the thing about Michigan State. One of the things that can carry you in these tournaments, as we kind of alluded to with Penn State and with Iowa, is if you get hot, if you're just nailing jumpers, that can carry you in a short-term environment. They have that capability fully. The thing that makes me feel a little bit better about it, as opposed to Iowa or Penn State, besides only having to win 3 as opposed to 4, is we know Michigan State is also capable of playing very well defensively. Sure. Michigan State has flaws, as we know. They're not going to get much low post game. They probably won't be able to do a lot in transition, although that remains to be seen. But they can shoot from deep. And although they haven't done this as well in recent games, we know they are capable of being a high-level defensive team too. So if you can combine those things, if you are shooting well from deep and you are guarding well, yeah, you can beat anybody. Not just in this tournament. I mean, anybody, literally anybody in the country. But the question is, can you put those things together and can you do it consistently enough to get a championship? And that's obviously the question with Michigan State, because we're a Michigan State podcast, but we're not going to fool ourselves. Michigan State has had consistency problems the same way all these other teams we're talking about have had.
Right.
So it just comes down to, do you believe that they've now hit a gear late that will carry them from here and they will be able to play at a different level now? I think it's possible, but how can anybody have supreme confidence there? I just don't know.
Yeah, no, I agree. Well, it'll be a lot of fun. My family's looking forward. We're going to be there at the Big Ten tournament. We are definitely upset that Iowa lost that game to Nebraska. It helps Michigan State with the double bye, certainly, but it also makes it so that Michigan State runs into Iowa very early in the tournament. And so we can't have like last year was perfect. They never had to play each other, and we won every game. Our teams won every game except when Michigan State dropped to Purdue.
Purdue, yeah.
So anyway, this will not be the same, but we can still. And I don't know. I was looking forward to booing Rutgers, and now they're playing Michigan to the first round. So I don't know. Maybe I guess I can boo both teams. So, but it's a fun time. We'll look forward to it. And it's going to make the.
I'm not going to have any difficulty myself. I'll be in scarlet and black for that one. I won't even think twice about it.
I can still boo both teams.
You have to have. Well, yeah, you can have the old cliche about rooting for a meteor strike, but look, I get people still holding on to some resentment. And I was surprised, but when I look at how it's gone for Rutgers, you understand it now. Steve Michael knew this was coming. He knew what kind of spot they were in. And I think that's why, and I still think, of course, he should have done the right thing, but I understand it now, as I'm sure his thought is, hey, my first loyalty is to the guys that I'm coaching. And I got to do what I have to do to put them in the best spot to succeed. And, if that was in fact his rationale, which I suspect it was, time has proven out that he was right about that. It still didn't work, but he was right. It could have been worse. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, the universe seemed to kind of had other thoughts for Rutgers as well. So maybe it won't work out for Rutgers anyway. So we'll get back to you. We're going to have a game or show, right before Michigan State, once we know the opponent for Michigan State. So that'll come out on Thursday night at some point. I got to get back from the game, so whenever it'll come out, so you'll have plenty of time to listen to it. Make sure you download it. If you're not yet subscribed, make sure you subscribe to the show. If you've not yet left a written review, please leave a written review. If you also want to get $5 gift card for Nudge Printing, those are available. So you just take a screenshot, email the screenshot to me of your written review at eric@tffinauts.com. Then I can get you the gift card. You get $5 off in addition to your 20% off by typing Final Four into the coupon code. If you have water problems and need some gutter work or just want someone to check it out to make sure things are okay and you're the west side of the state, make sure you contact Kurt and his team at the Brothers That Just Do Gutters. So until next time, the Final Four is on the schedule. Go green.